again, YouTube, and we're back with another work with me video for Princess Leia from Star Wars This Is Days. So we have 8 pieces of fabric, 1 front, 2 back, 2 shoulder, 1 collar and 2 hood. So my first step is to put the 2 hood pieces together and sew them together along the top. And I realized I was practically out of frame, so I moved closer. Now I don't sew the entire part because the back of the hood is going to be a bit open to facilitate getting it on the doll. So then after sewing, I open the hood again and fold it again in the other direction and then sew along bottom edge around the sides we didn't sew. My explanation is a bit bad, so hopefully the footage helps a bit more. So after turning that inside out, I pin all the seams and paste the seams with iron. After pressing, I put that one side. Next, I fold the collar in half, good side to good side, and I sew up the 2 sides. Then I take the back pieces and the front piece and pin them together at the shoulder seams. After doing the shoulder seams, I flip the seam allowance towards the back and sew top stitch that. After that's done, I pin the hood, and then I pin the collar piece to the collar on the top part of the main body of the clothes. So I first sewed on the hood and then the collar piece just to make it easier, but if you want to, you can sew it on at the same time. My next step is to pin and sew on the sleeves to the body. As usual, it's a more tedious step visually. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. The smaller your seam allowance, the easier it is to pin on the sleeves at the shoulders. Mainly a wider seam allowance at the shoulders makes it difficult to properly align your pieces. Make sure when pinning the pieces together, like with a fabric like this, that the fabric is good side to good side when you sew. So after sewing on the shoulders, I go to the sleeve cuffs, flip over the small seam allowance, pin it in place, and making sure that the edges are pinned the same amount. And then I move the other sleeve to the other sleeve, comparing the amount that the seam allowance is flipped over to make sure that we don't end up with a seam allowance that's a bit too big. Then I do the same with the bottom hem of the dress, for the front piece and then the two back pieces. I think you might have noticed, but sometimes when I pin, or for the most part when I pin my seams together to sew, I use a stitch that is about 90 degrees towards the edge I'm sewing. That's mainly because it's a lot easier to take out the pins, and in some cases it's easier to sew over the pins. Not that I'd suggest that, but there are some things that it really helps with, but be prepared to lose a few sewing needles for your machine. Other times when I pin small edges like the seam allowance, I pin it in the same direction as the edge of the fabric, just mainly because there isn't enough space to pin it differently. Anyway, so after sewing up the edges, I start pinning the side seams up for the outfit. And I usually start from the edge of the sleeve to the armpit, and then I pin from the bottom edge. And you can see me measure about how much space I need to have a slit in the bottom of the dress on the sides. And yes, so basically when sewing up the side seams, my priority is to align the edges and align the seams, like the underarm seam, the shoulder seam at the underarm. And some fabrics can be very difficult to get everything aligned properly, even if it's technically how it should be. So sewing up the side seams and then flipping the sleeves inside out, because we haven't very much added the closure on the back yet, and checking it on the doll. I mean the mannequin. The mannequin is shorter than the doll it's intended for, so yeah, it's a bit long. So next step, I take my zipper and I fold over the back, the opening edges, and pin the zipper. I try to pin the fabric as close to the zipper as possible, and then later I try to sew as close as possible. Some fabrics, again, it doesn't always want to work out. Now I pin this fabric onto the zipper while the zipper is closed to try and make sure everything lines up properly. And then at the same time I'm going to pin over the edges of the slits of the dress and sew that. And something happened there, and then I just need to sew up the back edge of the skirt that wasn't closed with the zipper. I start pinning at the bottom hem and going up to the zipper, making sure that everything lines up and the fabric doesn't fold in on itself somewhere and make life difficult. And sewing up, flipping inside out, and the dress itself is pretty much done. Now I also made a belt for the person, for the doll, out of craft foam. Nothing complicated, one long piece for the belt, 5 pentagonal pieces, octagonal, stupid thing, and some dots I punched out of a hole punch. And glued that together and added snaps to the back, and then that's the belt. And I completely forgot about me adding a snap to the back of the collar so that it can close nicely. As usual, when I'm adding a snap to a piece that has an edge that sticks out, that's going to be visible, I sew the flat part of the snap onto the edge of the collar of the fabric that isn't going to be seen, just normally, just like that. And then I sew the other snap piece with the pointy bit onto the fabric. If the fabric is 2 layers, I try to sew it so that I only catch the fabric of 1 layer and end up not having my stitches visible on the outside of the layer. Hopefully someday I can show you that in detail. In all honesty, I'm not that familiar with Star Wars. So I'm one of those weird people who hasn't seen it yet. Why? I don't know. But I'm more of a person who likes fantasy rather than sci-fi. And the idea of space makes me uncomfortable. And, maybe someday I'll watch it, since it's kind of one of the biggest franchises out there, or most famous, or whatever. Anyway, fitting it on the doll again, zipping up the back, closing the snap, and that's how it looks. A bit plain without the belt.